Yo, Tony, LAC of Chaos. Today, we're going to talk about something that came out very recently, and I feel like it's going to be quite the interesting subject. I've already talked about it at length with some of my friends a while back, but I feel like I could say even more in a video form, so uh, I'm just going to probably do like a short sort of review of the new 6 Feet Under album, Next to Die. Um, as you can kind of see, I do have a physical CD of it. However, don't necessarily take that as an endorsement quite yet, because I do have a lot of feelings about this album that I just need to sort of express. And I think everyone knows who 6 Feet Under is. After Chris Barnes had left Cannibal Corpse shortly after the bleeding, he had started 6 Feet Under as a side project with Terry Butler as and I believe quite a few other people. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but there's a lot of pretty big names on there that were involved. Alan West, I think, was a part of it. Steve Swanson, and I think one of the biggest ones that comes out of it. Oh, yeah, Terry Butler, Alan West, Greg Gall. Um, yeah, no, this album has made a pretty major impact with Haunted, and there is a very common thing about it, and that it's even though this is considered as a classic by some, others find it to be not as good as it could potentially be. Um, because unlike with Cannibal Corpse, which is a very technical and advanced band, 6 Feet Under is very much a simple, very simplistic band. I think a good example of this is Lycanthropy, which I think most people know for its da da dun da da dun da 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 dun da da dun da 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 dun da da dun da 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 dun da da dun repeated ad nauseum, and it focuses far more on the groove than it does necessarily blast beat tempos. And while that can be a turnoff for some people, um, it's for me. This is one of the best death metal records you can get a hold of, and in terms of death metal, I do end up listening to this a lot, as I do, the first four Cannibal Corpse records. So I do kind of understand where people come from with that. And ever since then, 6 Feet Under has gone through peaks and valleys. Um, a few good examples is that Warpact and what's that third album called? I believe it's called Maximum Violence. Um, there's some songs where people can be so on it. Like I know some people don't like 420 due to the cleanly sung vocals that come in, and then in Maximum Violence, uh, there is the opener Feasting on the Blood of the Insane, which has that fucking like rap verse in there. Um, and going through it just goes through more and more confusing aspects. Whether it be on True Carnage, where you have songs like One Bullet Left, where Ice-T has a very abrupt rap verse that comes in, or the infamous E vocals that I am not gonna bother trying to do because I seriously don't care about them that much. Um, but nonetheless, 6 Feet Under has always had the fans. But even in some cases, there's just some records that have been indefensible. Um, a few notable examples are the Graveyard Classic series, where most people are usually fine with Graveyard 1 and 3. Usually they don't even like those records, but they are just like whatever, they're competent, right? But Graveyard Classics 2, where it's all AC/DC Back in Black from front to back, and Graveyard Classics 4, Number of the Priest, are considered god awful, and I am inclined to agree with them. And then not only that, but Chris Barnes has had a very noticeable decline in vocals. I believe starting with True Carnage. Even though, in my opinion, his lows sound fantastic on that record, it's more his questionable vocal decisions, as well as choosing to enunciate his words more on later records. And it can become very apparent as his voice becomes weaker, especially in the 2010s. Like with Crypt of the Devil being like one of the last times his vocals had sounded good for quite some time. Um, though I am being a little disingenuous there. I feel like Crypt of the Devil, um, even that record has some weak moments in the vocals, and with Torment, and especially the Graveyard Classics 4 and what's that fucking Nightmares of the Decomposed. God, what the fuck happened? Like, um, it is dreadful. Like some of the worst vocalizations you will ever hear on a record. Um, and it's gone to the point where he's almost become a meme over that. And he's often been ridiculed for 6 Feet Under and the sound of it, as well as his massive ego. Which, to be fair, he was on the first 4 Cannibal Corpse records, and he did also make some fantastic records with 6 Feet Under. I don't even blame him. Um, but he's been very divisive. He's been absolutely divisive, and um, you know, I would say that usually, at least in the 2010s, his backing band you would usually be able to, lift the music up to some point. Like I do like songs off of Torment. Like one of the songs that gets stuck in my head is the separation of flesh from bone, and as ridiculous as the name is, Bloody Underwear was kind of a good song. I mean, having a sequel to Fucked with a Knife is pretty cool. Um, but after that god awful 2020 album, Nightmares of the Decomposed, which not only had that one song that got memed on relentlessly with the noose, where people would point out with how fucking awful Chris Barnes sounds on the verses there. Um, I think something that people fail to look into is the fact that even if the riffs were good, Chris Barnes would still like it would still just be like Torment. Like no one really cares or talks about Torment. They say the vocals suck on Torment, but they don't really say like, oh yeah, it's like the worst album ever. No, no one does that. But people say that about Nightmares of the Decomposed, and I think part of why is because the riffs are fucking boring, and that's the first album Jack Owen was like ever on. So it's like you would think like, oh yeah, Jack Owen's back in the band. This is gonna be Cannibal Corpse back to like its roots, baby. Nope. Some of the worst shit ever made. Fortunately, they did make another record after this that did kind of. Excuse me. Oh, I'm leaving that in the video. Um, um, they did make a pretty good record with shit. Why am I forgetting the name? Not Nightmares of the. I'm gonna Killing for Revenge. Jesus, sorry about that. Yeah, Killing for Revenge brings back a lot of the Cannibal Corpse isms. You have a lot more blast beats. You have a lot less groove involved. Um, a lot. You have even Vince Locke on doing the album cover. So going into that record, I was very satisfied with what was there. Chris Barnes had sounds better than he did on the previous record, and he did remove some of the things that made him unpopular by just sticking to his traditional growl. And not that that record didn't have flaws, because I do feel like Chris Barnes's performance was very one note, and there were some so slow, mid-paced, boring, shuggy songs that I don't think were quite up to par. But it did show a lot of promise for future 600. I also really liked the production on that record, as it wasn't too overly produced. It wasn't underproduced either. It just had this right feeling of like rawness while still having clarity, to where I was really into it. I think that was one of the greatest, not one of the greatest records of the year, but it was certainly a good record. I would even say I preferred it to I think what Cannibal Corpse put out the year before. I think it was called Chaos Horrific. Um, and I know that's a very unpopular opinion. I'm not really too sure why. I think people just were very shaken by the previous album, but I was a fan of the previous record. So coming in at Next to Die, um, I was very, very hopeful, and the singles were fucking fantastic. Let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. I think Unmistakable Smell of Death was one of the singles off of this. And Mutilated Corpse in the Woods, even though it was a little one note, as it was like, Mutilated Corpse in the Woods ad nauseum, I still liked it. I mean, it still had some pretty nice riffs. I mean, it was definitely on the simpler end of things, but it definitely had my ears peaked. This is like it feels more in line with Jack Owen and Chris Barnes coming together to make some old school death metal. Um, so I didn't have any reason to really complain, but um, I did end up listening to the record when it came out, and I don't know, man. It's just not very good. I was hopeful too. I mean, like with such promising singles, you would think it's gonna be something great, but it just didn't really pan out, did it? Um, and there was a couple things with the singles that could have pointed to this, and it actually mainly does not have to do with Chris Barnes, because Chris Barnes, in my opinion, sounds the best he has since at least Unborn and Undead, if not even before that. I mean, he sounded fantastic live. And while his voice is definitely weaker, like he can't do his mids and highs as much as he did, so I think that's why he tends to avoid them on this record. Um, he sounds pretty fucking good. Um, his vocals are surprisingly clear for a death metal musician. I mean, I could even understand him on Haunted, and he's even more clear on this record. Um, and unlike with the previous record, he definitely changes his vocal delivery a bit because um, throughout Killing for Revenge, he often has this offbeat, sort of like syncopated rhythm to it that I did really enjoy. But he stays more on the groove here and is draws out his vocals a little more. And I think that's pretty decent of him. I mean, I like the way he sounds throughout this, but my problem with this is not Chris Barnes. I hate to say it, but it's Jack Owen on this, and it's also Marco Petrozella, who are really under delivering on this record. Um, you would think that with such a talented repertoire, I feel like the music should be a bit more compact and stable, but in this case, I'm just not really feeling that like vibe to it, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that I can come across. So the album starts with Approach Your Grave, right? Leaving that in too. Approach Your Grave. It's an interesting start. It has this very slow, plodding intro. It's not too dissimilar to what you heard on Maximum Violence with Feasting on the Blood of Insane. It's pretty standard 6 Feet Under fare as an intro, right? Um, and then the song starts, and I just can't help but feel incredibly bored. All it is for most of the song is this really bare bones dun 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 dun. That's basically the entire riff. And I think it's trying to harken back to early 6 Feet Under. Because after all, that is something that a lot of fans will come to, 6 Feet Under for. They want that groovy, slow sound. Um, I think it's also an appropriate way to continue what you have done with Jack Owen. You essentially make a new Cannibal Corpse record with Killing for Revenge, and with 6 Feet Under, you might as well start back at Haunted, right? But this is missing a lot of important things in the Haunted formula. Um, Off of the top of my head, we have the first thing that comes to mind is that the guitar tone fucking sucks. It's very plastic. It sounds like a MIDI to me. It sounds very unnatural and not like a human had played it. And it has to do with the very polished production. This was an issue on Nightmares of the Decomposed as well, but it's especially prevalent here. And you can hear it on some of these slower songs that I'll talk about, with the exception of one, which I'll get to. Um, and beyond that, there's also a lack of groove. In a lot of the groovier songs that 6 Feet Under would do, there's often this rhythm that's like, but that sort of rhythm, right? Um, and that gives it a lot of groove. And that is something you would, hear in a 6 Feet Under record. And I think that's part of why this record sticks with me, because when the guitars line up so well with the drums, it just gets stuck in your head, and that is something that I find absolutely wonderful about this record. But when I put this 6 Feet Under song on, it just kind of plods over and over, and I feel like that issue kind of continues as you have songs such as Mr. Blood and Guts, which is just like a almost like a thrashy sort of death metal cut, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Like all you have is like the hook, which is just like Mr. Blood and Guts, I have no soul. Like I guess, man. Like if you want to repeat that over and over, that's on you. But for me, I just don't really feel it. Because again, the groove isn't really there, and rhythmically, the guitar riff isn't really providing that much interesting. Um, but I suppose we do have like decent songs on here. I mean, Destroyed Remains, even if it is a faster song, I don't think the riff is that interesting because it's doesn't really go much of anywhere. It's very simplistic. Like it just feels like this is the first death metal riff I ever wrote, and this is the first time I've ever tremolo picking, and that's what something like Destroyed Remains sound like. And even though there are songs where I don't really feel like that's the case, I feel like Unmistakable Smell of Death is some pretty good songwriting, guitar tone aside. Um, I feel like that's something that the record kind of really fails to capture for me. Um, it wants to go for a groove that just isn't there when it's playing with such a piss poor guitar tone. And again, Chris Barnes sounds great. None of his vocals sound forced or like misplaced. I think he does a totally serviceable job. I just wish he had done a little more highs. That You can hear it a little bit on Unmistakable Smell of Death, but like he doesn't really go much of anywhere with it. And like songs like the title track, Skin Coffins, I can't even really tell you what some of those sound like. Because again, they just go nowhere. The drums have no groove, and Jack Owen's guitar tone, even if I were to find the guitar tone good, I don't even know if I would really be able to recall it like I would on Killing for Revenge, because I think a lot of the riffs on that record were pretty well written. Um, but there is something I will say. I've said this in the past, and I will continue to say it now. Love their albums or not, 6 Feet Under have always done something new and different on every single album, no matter what it is. Um, there's always like some outlier track that sounds nothing like they've ever done before. There was deathcore on Torment. There was whatever the fuck was going on Nightmares of the Decomposed. Killing for Revenge was the most old school death metal they've been in a very long time. Um, Undead and Unborn had a lot of very interesting death metal parts, as well as, mixing some new and some old. That kind of reminded me of the bootleg Created to Kill from Cannibal Corpse, where he would combine those type of vocals into the mix, and it worked so well on that record. Like, he uses it masterfully. And it kind of stands out as some quality music. And I feel like when Cannibal Corpse choose to experiment here rather than try and do the same old, it does seriously pan out. And this outro, Ill Wishes, has become one of my favorite 6 Feet Under songs. As of all things, they go fucking Death Doom. Ugh. With like clean guitars. You have Chris Barnes doing whispered vocals. And it kind of goes like back and forth between these like whispered vocals, and it has this sort of like mystique that, if I'm being completely honest, it reminds me a lot of the later Burzum records. Like, I'm talking like Beilus and Fallen and Umskiptar and shit like that, because he loves to utilize whispering. And here, it fucking works great. I love that riff. It's very simple, but for Death Doom, it makes sense. And even though I typically have a issue with the guitar tone sounding like a MIDI, I feel like when the drums are synced with what the with what the guitar is playing, it feels fantastic. I can just get into it. And even though I will be honest, a lot of 6 Feet Under lyrics have not been fantastic. They never have been fantastic, but I really can't complain about that song at all. That's kind of why I have this record over their previous one, Killing for Revenge, just because as much as I do like Killing for Revenge, I have not really spun the song from that any of the songs from that record as much as I have Ill Wishes. And for me at least, it kind of goes up there with some of my favorite Six Feet Under songs. Like if I were to mention a few that I really like, Feasting on the Blood of the Insane, what's that fucking song called? Um it's off of the True Carnage record. It's a single off the record. I'll go look it up real quick. But like 420 is one of my favorite songs from them. Oh, The Day the Dead Walked. Yes, that one is fantastic. Haunted, of course, has Lycanthropy as well as The Enemy Inside, Remains of You. All those songs. I'm even talking like classic Six Feet Under, America the Brutal. Wait, what's that fucking song called? The Seed of Phil. Like a lot of the songs off of Undead Unborn, like Formaldehyde and all that shit. There's like so many songs I feel like it's on par with. And it's mainly because they're doing something different, and that's what I like about that song. Unfortunately, what Six Feet Under appears to be doing with this record is that they want to go back to the old school, um, and do like 6 Feet Under as it was, like back in the 90s. And I get it. People love early 6 Feet Under, but I feel like if you want to replicate that sound, you have to understand what they had going for them. And I feel like with the groovy cuts that 6 Feet Under have been putting out lately, they kind of miss the groove aspect of it, and they just kind of make these slow, mid-paced, boring songs that don't really get the crowd moving. Like I would say, like the songs on Warpath or Haunted, they get the crowd moving because there's an actual groove there. True Carnage, even with some of the weirder vocal takes, it's still fantastic because there's the proper groove there, and some of that like hard rock influence really starts to come in. But I don't feel it on these recent records, and I think that's why a lot of people will often cite Haunted and Warpath and Maximum Violence as these fantastic records. But when it comes to pure later stuff, Undead, Unborn, Crypt of the Devil are far more praised than Torment, Nightmares of the Decomposed, and this new record, mainly because they just simply stick to more traditional death metal. And I have noticed people praise the traditional death metal stuff on this way more. And I don't think it's because people don't want some groovy old school like 6 Feet Under. It's because they're not doing the right stuff to make it sound good. That combined with the overproduced guitar tone of Jack Owens and the drum parts being completely lame, it just kind of results in 6 Feet Under not quite delivering as they should. Um, I will say, Chris Barnes is not the reason why that album sucks. A sentiment I'm tired of hearing is 6 Feet Under is the reason why every 6 Feet Under record sucks. It's not Chris Barnes. It's Jack Owen in this case. And I feel like it's kind of a similar case for some of these songs. Sometimes the instrumentation just doesn't fit Chris. And that's fine. Sometimes that just happens. Or sometimes it's just his vocals are being bad. But it isn't always Chris's fault. Let it be known, it isn't always Chris's fault. I saw 6 Feet Under live. That's why I have the autographed copy of these. I didn't meet Chris or Jack Owen. Well, I did meet Jack Owen personally. He signed these Christmas lights that he gave out to the crowd. Look at this. Um, but you know, I saw them live, and both Jack Owen and Chris Barnes, they sound great. I will say there is some misplaced sounds that Chris Barnes goes for, but I would not lie and say that, oh yeah, no, Chris just sucks now. No, I don't think that's the case. He sounded fantastic for a while now. Like, for me, he even sounds like at least the best since True Carnage. And I know that might be a crazy opinion, but he's seriously put in some effort as of late. I think it's because he stopped smoking weed, which has been frying his voice, and as a result, even as his age has taken a toll on him, and some of his highs do sound weaker, he is able to perform some of his old school songs pretty fucking well. And I feel like that's another thing that makes Killing for Revenge work for me is that his vocals has improved substantially. I kind of wish we got more of what Killing for Revenge had to offer, and maybe with some additional experimentation rather than trying to do the traditional 6 Feet Under sound without understanding what 6 Feet Under really sounds like. But other than that, I mean, there are good things about this record. I mean, I will say there are like three and a half songs I would come back to, which are, of course, the singles. Um, from what I remember, Wrath and Terror Takes Command was probably good too, but I might be misremembering. And Ill Wishes is fantastic. Um, but, you know, this does have its high moments. It does absolutely have its high moments. It just has a lot of low moments too. Overall, I kind of feel like a 4 or 5 out of 10 is appropriate for this album. Um, I will probably give it a couple more listens to see if it improves, and if it does, maybe I'll do like a 6 Feet Under ranked video because they do have like 15 albums, and I would love to just talk about this band that I have so many thoughts about in depth. But that's kind of how I feel about Next to Die. It is quite a mixed bag of a record, and it does have a lot of problems. But 6 Feet Under has some improvements. It's just Jack Owen and Marco Pietrolezza that really has to, step it up. Um, I don't really have anything to say about Ray Suhi or Jeff Hewitt, but they're totally fine on the record. But that's how I feel about Next to Die. Yep. Uh, Tony, Nelly State of Chaos. I'm out.